right, so let's go ahead and give an update on what's going on in Ukraine. Here's Kamala Harris in Munich over the weekend insinuating that Russia is about to invade Ukraine.
I mean, listen, guys, we're talking about the potential for war in Europe. I mean, let's really take a moment to understand the significance of what we're talking about. It's been over 70 years. And through those 70 years, as I mentioned yesterday, there has been peace and security. We are talking about the real possibility of war in Europe.
War in Europe, she says, a real possibility that there's going to be war in Europe. Well, okay. Now some people might think that there's going to be a world war, like this is going to trigger World War III, and that's certainly not going to happen because the United States has lost a lot of influence in Europe. There's going to be a lot of European countries that will not join in on a war with Russia because they are dependent on energy. And we're going to get to that because they're about to become even more dependent on Russia for energy. And they want to be friends with Russia. They're starting to build relationships with the country. They're not trying to make enemies. And that's an important point. Now, if the United States, or if Russia were to invade Ukraine and there were to be a war, obviously Ukraine would be battling Russia. Poland would jump in on that. Belarus would be jumping in on the Russian side. The U.S. would be supporting. I don't know if we would send troops or not. It's kind of an open-ended question. But certainly there would potentially be, I suppose, a war in Europe, but it wouldn't be what people are thinking. It wouldn't be like France and Germany and the UK joining in and battling it out on the front lines against Russia. I just don't see that happening. But let's go ahead and continue on, and then we'll get more into what the real reason for this war is, or this escalation, what it's really about. The U.S. has not provided any evidence of an attack, yet the Washington Post is reporting that the U.S. has informed the UN that it has credible information showing Moscow compiling lists of Ukrainians to be killed or sent to camps following a military occupation, according to a letter to the UN human rights chief obtained by the Washington Post last night. The letter alleges that Moscow's post-invasion planning would involve torture, forced disappearances, and widespread human suffering. It does not describe the nature of the intelligence that undergirds its assessment. Okay, no evidence. So they're saying, we've got this document. Trust us, we have this document. Human rights abuses, torture, camps, all of the trigger buzzwords that are going to get Americans feeling like we must do something. This is terrible. We can't allow this to happen to people. But again, no evidence. And it's the Washington Post. And we know that they tend to at times be the mouthpiece of the CIA. So until they show us some evidence that there's actually going to be this invasion, that there's going to be these terrible human rights abuses that end up occurring, you know, I guess choose to believe it if you want to believe it. But speaking to journalists on Monday, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov denied the letter's claims. Quote, "Do you realize that this is an absolute canard, a lie?" He said. "It's an absolute fiction. There is no such list. It's a fake," Peskov said. So now, according to the author of the letter, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Bathsheba Crocker, says the Russian military's targets would include Russian and Belarusian dissidents in exile in Ukraine, journalists and anti-corruption activists, and vulnerable populations such as religious and ethnic minorities and LGBTQI persons. So, of course, right, they're playing on anybody and everybody that you want to protect. The Russians are coming, and the Russians are going after them. The Russians are these barbaric people, and they're going to be torturing and harming others. So again, meant to pull at your heartstrings, meant to get you to agree to this war, because a lot of people are asking the question, why? Why are we even doing this? Why do we care so much about Ukraine? We have so many problems on our own soil right now. Why? Why would we be trying to defend Ukraine, which is not a NATO nation, against Russia? Good question. They're trying to say because of human rights abuses. Now, David Martin, he's a reporter for CBS News. He says that Putin has ordered Russian forces to invade Ukraine and has a reserve unit following to run an occupation. So after they invade, they're going to run an occupation, according to David Martin at CBS News. And you can see here with this tweet, this man, he says, I trust him totally. He says Putin has just ordered Russian forces to invade Ukraine in its entirety. So now, look, I don't doubt that there is potentially a plan to go into Donbas. That is the area of Ukraine that has been under a civil war There's areas of Donbas that are not even under Ukrainian control. They haven't been under Ukrainian control for 8 years. It's a civil war. They're declared their own people's republic, and they fight against Ukraine, and they have been for a long time. Now, people in these areas are reporting that they're being shelled by Ukrainian forces. Ukrainian forces say, no, that's not true. It's them. They're shelling at us inside of Ukraine. Doesn't totally make a lot of sense. The people inside of this region in the Donbas, they're trying to hold that area. Why they would shoot out at Ukraine doesn't really make a lot of sense. They're just trying to keep peace and declare their little region its own nation. If they were to shoot out at Ukraine, that would be because Ukraine's either shooting in at them, or it would imply that they're trying to expand deeper into Ukraine, and they haven't been trying to do that at all. So it's more believable, actually, that these rebels that are holding this People's Republic of Luhansk and Donetsk, that they're holding these areas and that Ukrainian forces are actually shelling them first. And then, it's obviously they're escalating back. Now, people in these regions, because of the shelling, are now fleeing into Russia. So there's all these Ukrainians that are living in these areas, and they're now refugees fleeing into Russia. So there is potentially a possibility that Russia would go into Donbas, go into these areas in order to help secure them from the shelling from the Ukrainian forces. That's a possibility. That would absolutely be spun as an invasion, right? Because it's technically inside of Ukraine's borders. But again, areas of Ukraine that are not under Ukrainian control, the people in these areas actually receive Russian passports because they're in civil war with Ukraine. They can't get their papers from Ukrainian government because of the war. So Russia has stepped in and given these people, that are living there, that are not people that aren't even fighting in the war, just your average civilians. They give them papers, they give them passports so that they're not trapped inside of this area. They can travel freely around the world and, live their lives. I actually have a neighbor here who's from Donbas, and she has Russian papers because that's how they can get in and out. So maybe there is a plan for Putin to go into Donbas. I don't really believe that there is a wide-scale plan for Putin to take all of Ukraine. I just don't see Russia having any desire to take over a country that has a lot of corruption, that needs a lot of money. There's a lot of historical trauma between the two countries. The Ukrainians in particular have a very, very, and for good reason, very bad taste in their mouth about Russians. They do not want to be a part of Russia. I don't see Russia wanting to take that on. That would be a beast to have to control. They would fight back. There would be uprisings. I just don't really see it. Donbas, that's a different situation. The people there are already separated. They already want to be their own nation, or they want to join Russia. That's possible. So the Ukrainian government has repeatedly walked back American media, sounding the alarm over an imminent Russian invasion. You can see here, Ukraine's defense minister, Oleksiy, am I saying that right? Oleksiy Reznikov on Sunday said that it is inappropriate to talk about a Russian invasion in the coming days. Reznikov's statement appeared to contradict American press reports, which stated that Russian President Vladimir Putin has officially ordered his commanders to proceed with the military invasion of Ukraine. Reznikov added, that does not mean the risks are low. It does not mean there's no threat. I want to remind our partners that the threat has existed since 2013. So ever since there's been an overthrowing of the government, now remember back in 2013, there was a friendly Russian president in Ukraine. United States staged a coup, forced that president out, did not, claiming that we're all about democracy. We actually thwarted democracy, did not allow that president to finish out his term. Instead, ousted him and put in a pro-Western president, which is Zelensky. Actually, it was somebody prior to Zelensky, but now we've continued to maintain pro-Western presidents in the region. So it's been very unstable in Ukraine since that happened, since the overthrowing of their government. That is when Vladimir Putin was able to go in and annex Crimea. A reminder, the people in Crimea wanted to be with Russia. They overwhelmingly supported being with Russia rather than being with Ukraine. So that happened. That's why Obama never went in and said, well, we got to do something about this to save these people. The people didn't want to be saved. Again, if you go in and you try and you do something that people don't want, you're going to see guerrilla warfare. You're going to see uprisings. The Crimean people would have absolutely fought back against NATO forces had NATO forces gone in there and tried to bring Crimea back into the Ukrainian fold. It wouldn't have worked very well. Now, Reznikov stressed that Ukraine's army is ready to meet Russian troops and deter the threats of any attack, and they have been for many, many years. There were some reports that Biden has agreed to meet with Putin in a summit in principle, as long as Russia does not invade Ukraine. The White House released a statement following the news of the summit saying, as the president has repeatedly made clear, we are committed to pursuing diplomacy until the moment an invasion begins, which means if Russia goes into Donbas to help secure those areas that are not under Ukrainian control and haven't been for almost a decade, that would be considered an invasion. I believe the White House is banking on that. I think they are banking on Russia doing this smaller incursion into Donbas. They're going to paint it like, see, they're coming. We told you so. They're coming. And really, this was always a possibility that they would take Donbas. The people in Donbas, it's not as... Now, with Crimea, it was really overwhelming. The people there really wanted to be with Russia. In Donbas, it's not as overwhelming, but it is the majority. But it's more of a slight majority, I would say. But nonetheless, it's always been on the table. But Russia has always said no. The Donbas has been asking over and over and over, hey, come get us, come get us. And Russia says, no, we'll just help you out. We'll do humanitarian aid, probably weapons. They deny it, but they probably do. And passports and other sorts of humanitarian things that the people need. So the Kremlin on Monday said that there was no concrete plan for this summit. And, they're saying, no, we don't really have any plan for this. Now, that summit was arranged by Emmanuel Macron, the French president. He talked to Biden and said, would you meet with Putin? And he talked to Putin and said, would you meet with Biden? And they both said yes, but it's not a concrete summit. It was just like yes, we would meet, possibly. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov are set to meet Thursday, and during their meeting, they will prepare the substance of the summit, according to a statement from the French government, that Macron will work with all stakeholders to prepare the content of these discussions as well. So there could still be a summit between the two leaders. And of course, this gives Biden the ability to look like he's done something to stop this war. I believe that this is just my opinion, but I believe that the White House knows Russia has no desire to invade all of Ukraine. As I mentioned before, that would be a hot mess for Russia. But I do believe that they understand there is a possibility Russia takes Donbas. And now what the White House has set themselves up for is a win-win situation. Biden needs a win. This is a win-win situation. If Russia does go in and tries to secure those rebel-held areas in Donbas, Biden gets to say, I told you so, they're invading. They're starting with this little area, but they're coming, right? So he gets to look like he's won, he was right, Russia bad. If Russia does not go into Donbas and then Biden gets to look, and they have a summit or something, Biden gets to look like, see, my power and strength and American power and strength stopped Russia from this invasion. So either way, he gets to look like he's won on this. Now, I do want to bring up briefly, and I'm going to go deeper into this in a later video. In fact, I think I'm going to do this as my radar tomorrow for Rising. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline is really the crux of all of this, the mess. Because a lot of people are asking, why are we even caring about Ukraine? Most people can't even point to it on a map. They're not in NATO, so we have no obligation to them whatsoever. We have a lot of problems here at home. What is the issue? The Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline is a pipeline that would pump a ton of natural gas into Europe. So they already have the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. That pumps enough gas into Europe to make Europe about 30 to 40% dependent on Russian energy. That's a lot that has already caused Europe, for example, to not really be on board. I mean, you see what Emmanuel Macron's doing. He's trying to facilitate some peace. You got the Germans saying, calm it down. So you've got European allies that are not jumping, they're not chomping at the bit to go into war with Russia. They're saying, we're not so sure about this because they rely so heavily on the energy from Russia. Now that Nord Stream 2 pipeline would change the dynamic from 40%, the reliance on Russian energy, from 40% up to 80% in Europe. They would be heavily reliant on Russia as soon as that Nord Stream 2 pipeline turns on. And the thing is that the pipeline is complete. Now, the pipeline has been opposed by the Obama administration, by the Trump administration, by the Biden administration. They've done everything they can to ramp up rhetoric, to try to, fan the flames of saying Russia bad to Europe. Europe didn't really buy it. Europe has allowed the new pipeline to be built anyway. And the United States says that, okay, fine, but we're going to allow this Nord Stream 2 pipeline to be built. But in the event that Russia is aggressive at all, you have to sanction the pipeline or stop the pipeline, stop getting energy from the pipeline. You have to agree to these things. And Germany actually reluctantly agreed to this. So now the White House is in its last-ditch effort, which is why we're now seeing this really ramped-up escalation of war talk with Ukraine. And that is because the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is complete. It was finished in September, and now it's just being inspected. And as soon as the inspection is over by German and EU authorities, the pipeline turns on. And once that pipeline turns on, that's it. The United States is no longer heavily influential over Europe. Instead, Russia actually has a bit more influence and leverage over Europe than the United States does. And the United States does not like that. The US wants to keep Europe in the pocket of the United States and doesn't want Europe to be instead cozying up to Russia. The United States paints it as a security threat. They try to tell the Europeans and the American people that Russia having that much influence over Europe means that Russia is going to become this dominating militaristic threat, right? So they're trying to say once Russia becomes the energy provider of Europe, they're going to once again expand into the USSR and try to invade. Europe doesn't buy that. If Europe bought that, they wouldn't be agreeing to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Now, where Ukraine comes in on this is that there's currently gas that is being provided along with US allies and Ukraine to Europe through these Ukrainian pipelines. They're old, they're not efficient, and what would happen if Nord Stream 2 turns on is that Nord Stream 2 would allow gas to go through that pipeline, which goes under the Baltic Sea, rather than through Ukraine. So the gas would be more efficient. It would be cheaper for the Europeans. And it would also cost Ukraine a lot of money, because right now Ukraine gets a lot of money in pass-through fees, being able to have this pipeline through their country. They make money on that. Once Ukraine no longer gets money from that, that is a problem, because the United States is supporting Ukraine largely in a lot of ways, and we'd have to step in and support them even more possibly. So there's financial implications to this gas pipeline. There's geopolitical implications to this pipeline. And so the U.S. is ramping up the rhetoric because we're in the final, the last-ditch, final kind of home stretch efforts to stop this pipeline from turning on. And that is actually really what this is about. So when people are asking, what is this about? It's really about this gas pipeline. And not just because, oil war. It's about the geopolitical. There is some money involved, but it's a geopolitical issue of Russian influence expanding, and the U.S. doesn't really like that. So because we like to be the big bad bully around the world, right? And we can't. And listen, I am not at all against the United States being one of the strongest or one of the strongest nations in the world. Not saying that I want us to stop this bullying. I would prefer us to not do it through war and picking fights and being bullies. But I definitely don't want another country to be stronger than us. I mean, then you become beholden to them. And we're seeing that happen right now, even with China, because of their financial influence. They were very smart. They, instead of building military bases, they're building relationships, and they're financially dominating. We all know, because, like in this country, who dominates, people with money or people with muscle? It's always the person with money. And China's doing it that way. The United States continues to do it through military might. It worked in the past. It's not working as well anymore. They know that once Russia has this influence over Europe, all bets are off. So that is really what this is boiling down to. And so there is some implications for Russia as well. So there could be a reason for Russia, for example, there's more reason for them to not want to go into Ukraine at all, because they don't want to jeopardize that pipeline from being turned on. So that's why it's not really likely that Russia has any desire whatsoever to go into Ukraine, because that would immediately then put the pipeline at risk. However, if the U.S. continues to aggravate and continues to shell this Donbas region and continues to then cause refugees to flee into Russia, that's a problem for Russia, right? So Russia has to weigh it out. Are they going to allow just floods of refugees to come into Russia from the Donbas region, these Russian Ukrainians fleeing in, or do they want the pipeline? My guess is they want the pipeline more than they want I think they'll deal with the refugees, that crisis a bit, because I think they figured that that'll calm down. I don't know, though. Hard to say. But that's what's going on. I will give you more details on that more succinctly. Thank you so much for watching. Appreciate you. If you have any questions, comments, email me, kim@kimiverson.com. You can also join my locals community. The link is down below, or if you're watching on Rumble, the link is in the corner. You can also follow me on Rockfin. You can watch the show there as well. A lot of other great independent creators are on Rockfin. So you can go there also. Anyway, all right. Thanks for watching. See you later.